I never imagined my quiet life as a part-time farmer and academic would crash headlong into a suburban homeowners association. But that's exactly what went down in my second summer at Willowbrook Estates. On the surface, Willowbrook was your standard suburban setup: neat houses in muted tones, pristine lawns, and an HOA obsessed with mailbox uniformity and approved shrub colors. I should have trusted my instincts when the realtor mentioned the HOA was strict but fair. The fair part, I learned, was up for debate. The real trouble centered on my farmland, a 30-acre plot tacked onto the community. I owned it outright, but it was leased to the Department of Agriculture for cutting-edge crop rotation experiments. I'd inherited the land from my grandfather, who tended it lovingly for decades. Since my research job kept me on the road, I set up a formal lease with the USDA to run their sustainability trials: conservation, new crops, the works. It was a sweet deal. The land stayed active, the feds got their data, and I covered property taxes with the lease payments. Then along came the HOA's new vice president, Margaret Hensley, dubbed Karen by whispering neighbors, a brassy, sharp-tongued woman in her mid-50s who saw my farm as a blight on her perfect suburb. Her meddling started small complaints, fines, but escalated to something jaw-dropping: an electric fence around my land, meant to lock me out. Her scheme imploded spectacularly when the USDA caught wind, sparking a showdown that ended with serious legal fallout for Margaret and the HOA. This is the tale of how one woman's control fetish nearly tanked vital federal research and how justice finally shut her down. My grandfather bought the farmland 60 years ago, back when the area was just hills and open sky, anchored by a modest farmhouse. Over time, the city crept closer, and by the time I inherited it, developers had turned the surrounding land into Willowbrook Estetisa cookie-cutter neighborhood with all the charm of a spreadsheet. I moved into the old farmhouse near the farmland's edge, not expecting my neighbors to care so much about my every move. The farmland spanned 30 acres, split by a quiet creek. The USDA's lease let them plant test crops like pest-resistant corn or drought-tolerant barley while running eco-friendly experiments. Their marked trucks rolled in now and then to grab soil samples, set up sensors, or check irrigation at night. Some Willowbrook folks were intrigued, liking the rural vibe the fields added. Others, especially the HOA crowd, griped from day one: "Why are those government trucks driving by our sign? Is that plow running past 5 p.m.? The farmland's ugly, it's dragging down our home values." It was mostly low-key grumbling until Margaret took over and my world flipped. 3 months after a long research trip, I met Margaret Hensley face-to-face. I was on my porch, coffee in hand, when a tall woman strode up my dirt driveway, clutching a clipboard like a weapon. She wore a stiff blazer, radiating disapproval. "Hello," I said, standing. "Can I help you?" "I'm Margaret Hensley," she declared, ignoring my hand, "vice president of the Willowbrook Estates HOA. Her tone was as rigid as her posture. Before I could respond, she shoved a paper at me. "I'm here about these so-called farming activities on your land. We have rules against commercial operations in our community." I scanned the sheet: HOA bylaws citing non-residential land use. "Ma'am," I said, keeping cool, "the farmland predates your subdivision by decades. It's not commercial, it's leased to the Department of Agriculture for research. This isn't a business." Margaret's lips tightened. "We've seen no proof of that. If you're profiting, it could still count as commercial. Plus, your farm equipment is an eyesore." I blinked, holding my temper. "I'll share the lease details if you want, but the farmland was never part of the HOA. You only cover the housing lots past that boundary fence." She snorted, unconvinced. "We'll see. If it's tied to your house, it might fall under our rules. I'll be in touch." She spun around and marched off, leaving me stunned and uneasy. Over the next few weeks, Margaret hit me with a barrage of letters. Noise complaints: USDA tractors were too loud on weekends. Odor violations: she claimed fertilizer, barely used, was a nuisance. Aesthetic issues: she photographed irrigation pipes, calling them ugly wires. Each demanded fines unless I complied. I wrote back, explaining the farmland wasn't under HOA control and the USDA's work met all county and state regs. My position was solid: the land had a separate deed, and the subdivision's planners had excluded it from their covenants. But Margaret kept at it, getting creative. She even accused the USDA of environmental violations, alleging chemical runoff in the creek. That prompted a state inspection, which found nothing. Me land was a poster child for sustainability. Still, the constant scrutiny bogged down the USDA's work, annoying their scientists. Behind the scenes, Margaret stirred up board members, hinting my farmland tanked property values. Some neighbors bought it, fretting about pesticides or lot lines. Others told me quietly, ignore her, she's always causing drama. Ignoring her got tough as complaints piled up. Then came the breaking point, a stunt so wild it made her earlier moves look tame. One Saturday morning, I woke to a bizarre sight. Metal fence posts driven into the ground along the boundary facing Willowbrook. Nearby sat spools of wire, with workers in neon vests stringing them up. Confused, I approached. A young guy in a hard hat looked up. "Morning," he said. "This area's closed. We're putting in an electric fence for the HOA." I froze. An electric fence? On my land? He checked his clipboard. "Work order from Willowbrook Estates HOA. Says we need to secure the farmland boundary for liability reasons." Anger surged. "That's my property. The HOA has no right to fence it. Where's your boss?" The supervisor arrived, and I demanded they stop. He seemed puzzled but showed me a check with the HOA's letterhead. "We're just contractors," he said, apologetic. I called Margaret, who answered smugly. "Yes, I approved it. We voted. Your farmland's too risky. Anyone from your research crew could wander into our neighborhood, and we can't have kids near your fields. You can't build an electric fence on my land without permission," I snapped. "That's your opinion," she said. "The boundary's unclear. We're keeping your farm from spilling into our community." I was livid. The boundary wasn't unclear. I had surveys proving I owned a buffer zone between the farmland and the HOA lots. "I'm calling the county," I warned. "Go ahead," she said coolly. "The fence stays." I raced to the county recorder's office, documents in tow. A clerk pulled the original maps, confirming the farmland lay outside the HOA. She was shocked someone would fence private property and help me file an emergency injunction, though it'd take time. Back at the farm, the workers had nearly finished. The fence looped around a chunk of my land, blocking the main entrance from the subdivision side. Signs warned of electrification and potential shocks. When I told them to stop, they said only an HOA or court order could halt them. Furious, I snapped photos and videos, noting the contractor's name, fence brand, and signs. By evening, the fence was live, its wires humming. The gate I used for USDA trucks, near Willowbrook's paved road, was locked. It forced us to use a longer, bumpy dirt path on the far side prone to flooding and brutal for heavy gear. Margaret emailed the neighborhood, claiming the fence would protect our kids, boost property values, and stop farmland encroachment. She also threatened me with trespassing charges if I touched it. 3 days later, a USDA team arrived for routine soil tests. They normally use the main gate, but hit the electric fence instead. Dr. Rachel Carter called me, baffled. "Did you add a security system? The gate's locked, and the fence is hot." I sighed. "No, that's the HOA. They think they can block us. I'm working on a fix." The team had to drive 5 extra miles to the back route, slogging through mud that nearly trapped their truck. They reached the site an hour late. The farmland size meant they relied on the paved road for heavy equipment. Now, everything had to be dragged over rough ground, slowing research. Worse, the fence threatened a wildlife corridor tied to the USDA's habitat studies. Small animals crossing the creek could get zapped, skewing migration data. Margaret had gone overboard, picking a high-voltage cattle-grade fence. Dr. Carter flagged it as a hazard for animals and people alike. I pushed for the injunction, and a county planner, Mr. Ellis, offered to mediate, urging the HOA to disable the fence until a boundary review. At a tense meeting in Willowbrook's community center, Margaret showed up with 2 board members, toting a binder labeled Fence Project. Mr. Ellis displayed property maps, showing the farmland was separate. "The fence appears to encroach on private land," he said calmly. Margaret whipped out a sketchy survey from a private contractor, vaguely suggesting the boundary sat a few feet back, putting a common area under HOA control. The lines didn't match county records. Mr. Ellis frowned. "This doesn't hold up. The county can't accept it." Margaret's face tightened. "Then we'll get another survey. The fence stays, our safety comes first." The other board members shifted uncomfortably but stayed quiet. I spoke up. Ms. Hensley, you're blocking access to farmland leased to the Department of Agriculture. She shrugged. They can go around. We won't have odd trucks kicking up dust and noise in our community. Mr. Ellis ended the meeting, frustrated. Removing an illegal fence could take weeks, even with a judge's rush order. The farmland stayed cut off, and the USDA had to reroute. Then the USDA dropped a bomb, filing a formal complaint with state and federal authorities, naming the Willowbrook HOA and Margaret directly. They cited unlawful obstruction of a federally leased research site. Though I owned the land, the USDA's contract guaranteed them full access for science. Dr. Carter's team logged every issue: lost research hours, extra transport costs, wildlife risks, and safety concerns from the rogue fence. They warned that further fence expansion could block required eco-inspections. The complaint demanded the fence's removal or at least an access corridor for USDA vehicles. When the HOA caught wind, panic spread. A federal lawsuit was no joke. Legal fees could hit every homeowner. Residents questioned Margaret's fence obsession. She doubled down, emailing the neighborhood. Our covenants let us preserve Willowbrook's character. We won't bow to federal overreach. If the USDA wants in, they can get an HOA permit. A few cheered her nerve, but most were horrified, fearing massive fines or sanctions. The drama was just warming up. The fence caused more headaches. Margaret had tapped it into the community's power grid via a shady junction box. At first, it just zapped curious critters, but the contractor had used an oversized transformer. Dog walkers reported humming wires and sparks when grass brushed them. After a rain, part of the fence shorted, scorching a patch of lawn and stinking of burnt plastic. Kids playing nearby fled, spooked by a loud pop and flickering power. An electrician shut it off temporarily, but Margaret flipped it back on, insisting, a dead fence is no fence. We can't risk farmland intruders. Parents demanded to know if the high-voltage setup met code near homes. Margaret waved it off, blaming faulty wiring and promising a fix while keeping the fence live. Tensions climbed. The breaking point came when the USDA scheduled a big delivery-heavy machines for soil analysis, set to run weeks of real-time water and root tests. The trucks had permits for the main road through Willowbrook's edge, as usual. But they hit the locked, electrified fence, guarded by two private security guys Margaret hired. They demanded an HOA access pass. The lead engineer, Dr. Susan Grant, didn't play. This land's leased to the feds. We don't need your pass. One guard shrugged. Ms. Hensley's orders. No pass, no entry. A heated argument erupted. The USDA threatened to call the sheriff. By the time deputies arrived, neighbors were filming. The cops ordered the guards to back off or face charges for obstructing federal work. The trucks got through, but only after a 2-hour delay and a public relations disaster for the HOA. Local news pounced. Fence feud in Willowbrook. HOA locks out feds. Margaret slammed the police for overreach while quietly plotting to beef up the fence. The bad press lit a fire under residents. Their usually sleepy Facebook group exploded. Some backed Margaret on property rights, but most feared lawsuits or fines. No one wanted the HOA's budget gutted by a federal fight. At the next board meeting, held in a cramped clubhouse room, tempers boiled over. Margaret swept in, clipboard in hand, face stern, but faced a mob of furious homeowners. Board members grilled her openly for the first time. Margaret, you didn't mention a high-voltage fence, one said. We voted for a basic boundary, not a hazard tied to our grid. She brushed it off. Electrification's standard. Don't exaggerate. Another fired back. Your call sparked a federal complaint. We could owe thousands or worse. The USDA could sue for obstruction. Margaret smirked. They won't win. We have rights, and that farmland shouldn't ruin our quality of life. The board, fed up, voted to deactivate the fence. Margaret tried to veto it, claiming authority while the president was abroad for a family crisis. The meeting dissolved into shouting, some residents leaving in tears, fearing HOA bankruptcy. Others swore to oust Margaret. Meanwhile, I launched my own fight, with county help. I sued for trespass and property damage over the illegal fence. My lawyer, Thomas Reed, a steady guy, piled up evidence. Land surveys, photos, USDA statements, and neighbor accounts of the fence going up on my land without consent. We sought an injunction to tear it down, but property cases crawled, especially with boundary disputes. Margaret's lawyers countered with weak claims of unclear boundaries and HOA community protection rights, forcing a hearing. We got a restraining order to deactivate the fence, with a judge's review set 2 weeks out. The USDA kept pushing, their federal complaint looming larger than my suit. If it hit the Department of Justice, the HOA could face brutal penalties. I got calls from neighbors backing me, apologizing for Margaret's antics and asking how to help. "Show up at the hearing," I said. "Let the judge see this fence hurts everyone." Margaret didn't quit. She slapped "private property, no trespassing" signs on the fence, painting me as the intruder. She spread flyers accusing me of wrecking suburban peace with government experiments over families. They screamed fear. Who knows what chemicals they're spraying? Our kids are at risk. The USDA used minimal, regulated inputs, but Margaret didn't care, stoking paranoia about their work. She rallied a loud minority, demanding I reveal every crop detail. Some floated GMO conspiracies, claiming we'd poison the soil. The USDA posted a fact sheet drought-resistant grains, pollinator-friendly plots, but Margaret's rumors stuck, pitting neighbor against neighbor. She went door to door, pushing residents to stand up for the fence. It split Willowbrook. Some recoiled at her tactics. Others bought her sob story. The fence stayed hot, a buzzing symbol of the rift I'd once hoped to avoid. The court day arrived. Thomas and I faced Margaret and her HOA lawyer across the room. Judge Harlan, a silver-haired man, heard opening arguments. Thomas laid out the case. My deed proving the farmland's independence, county surveys showing the fence crossed my land, the USDA lease guaranteeing access, and photos of the electrified setup. Margaret's lawyer argued the boundary was disputed, needing a new survey, and claimed the HOA could shield itself from farm liabilities. The USDA's rep went hard. "We have a legal contract for this land. The fence blocks our Work-in Act against federal property use." Judge Harlan zeroed in on Margaret. "Ms. Hensley, did you authorize a fence on land possibly outside HOA control?" She stood, chin high. "Your Honor, our neighborhood's safety and look matter most. The farmland's a nuisance, maybe a health risk. Until boundaries are settled, we're protecting our community." He looked skeptical. "You have no proof the farm's hazardous. The USDA has permits, and the plaintiff has surveys. Why an electric fence?" Her lips thinned. "We thought it was needed. It's for the community." The hearing dragged all day. Judge Harlan adjourned, promising a written ruling on the injunction within a week. The fence stayed live. While we waited, the USDA upped the ante, asking the Department of Agriculture's Inspector General to step in, citing ongoing obstruction. The OIG flagged the Department of Justice, hinting at bigger legal trouble if the HOA didn't back off. Whispers of federal marshals spooked the sheriff's office, already stretched thin. Residents, feeling the heat, flooded the HOA with demands to end the mess. The HOA's lawyer pushed to deactivate the fence as a goodwill gesture, but Margaret refused, convinced giving in would greenlight farmland chaos. The HOA's treasurer, looking wrecked, admitted legal costs were bleeding reserves. If we lose a federal suit, homeowners could face huge assessments. Families dreaded thousands in bills for Margaret's war, but she blocked compromise, banking on a win if she could outlast the farm. A week later, Judge Harlan ruled, a preliminary injunction to deactivate the fence and remove parts on my land. He wrote, "The court finds Willowbrook Estates HOA under MS. Margaret Hensley's direction likely trespassed on private property. The plaintiff shows clear ownership beyond the disputed boundary. The electrified fence obstructs federally approved work, risking harm to people and wildlife. The court orders deactivation within 48 hours and removal of sections on plaintiff's land, pending final boundary resolution. Noncompliance may lead to contempt." I exhaled, reallifed a firm order to kill that fence. Margaret went ballistic, emailing the neighborhood that Judge Harlan was biased and the HOA should resist. But with contempt looming, the board overruled her, voting to comply. The next day, contractors unplugged the fence and tore down chunks on my land. The USDA cheered, resuming normal work. Neighbors relaxed, hoping it was over. But Margaret wasn't done. Desperate to prove me or the USDA wrong, she got reckless. A week after the fence came down, I noticed drones buzzing over the farmland at odd times. One hovered near a USDA sensor at dusk. Another swooped low, startling workers. Suspicious, I traced one's path to Willowbrook. One night, after hearing a drone, I drove near Margaret's house. There she was, lit by her backyard floodlight, working a controller, eyes on a tablet streaming the drone's feed. I called out from the sidewalk, "Margaret, why are you flying drones over my land without permission?" She jumped, snapping, "You can't prove it's mine," lowering the controller fast. "It's in your hands," I shot back, filming. "You're trespassing by airspace and breaking privacy laws. The USDA won't stand for this." Her face twisted. "I'm collecting proof of shady stuff on your fields. People deserve to know what's behind that fence." "You're harassing a federal agency," I said. "This'll end bad for you." She killed the drone, sneering, "We'll see who regrets it." I called the cops, who said I could file for trespass and harassment, especially if the drone filmed sensitive USDA gear. The USDA protested, citing unauthorized surveillance. The sheriff's office warned Margaret to stop flying over private land. She fumed, but seemed to back off for a moment. As Margaret schemed, the USDA's complaint climbed higher. The Department of Justice launched an investigation into the HOA and Margaret, focusing on the fence and drone spying. Feds interviewed me, USDA scientists, and neighbors, digging through HOA emails and board notes. Board members spilled, showing Margaret pushed the fence without a legit survey, ignoring warnings it crossed my land. Damningly, one email to her allies bragged, "If we block them long enough, they'll ditch their weird experiments." That hinted at deliberate interference with federal work. A big deal. The Justice Department weighed charges. Margaret called it slander, but Willowbrook buzzed with fear of her indictment for trespass, obstruction, or worse. In a final gambit, she trespassed on the farmland one afternoon, impatient for the boundary case to settle. Determined to catch the USDA in something sketchy, she slipped through a gap where the fence was gone, roaming the fields with her phone camera. A USDA tech spotted her poking at equipment. "Ma'am, you can't be here," he said. "Restricted area." Margaret ignored him, filming a sensor, ranting about hidden chemicals. The tech called security. I arrived to find her trying to pry open a locked USDA box marked "Authorized Access Only." "Stop," I shouted. "You're trespassing on federal property." She spun, eyes wild. "I'm checking what you're hiding. This farm's next to our homes. We deserve to be safe from your hazards." A federal officer, assigned to guard the site after repeat issues, stepped in. He ordered her to back off. When she refused, he cuffed her, citing potential theft or tampering. Margaret screamed about tyranny and lawsuits. Deputies hauled her off for trespassing, interfering with a federal site, and attempted vandalism. Her arrest rocked Willowbrook. Even her diehards saw she'd lost it. The HOA board met urgently, voting to boot her as vice president. They apologized publicly for the fence mess and vowed to cooperate with authorities. The Justice Department charged Margaret with trespassing, obstructing federal research, illegal fence installation, and violating the injunction. I filed a civil suit for fence removal costs and land damage, while the USDA sought compensation for research delays. The financial hit looked massive. Margaret's life unraveled. Legal bills forced her to list her fancy house. The bank foreclosed when she couldn't pay. Neighbors shunned her, dodging the scandal. The trial was a spectacle. Margaret, worn but defiant, claimed she acted for the community. The evidence buried here: mails, videos, surveys, and her court defiance. The judge tore into her. A mess. "Hensley, you've flouted laws, trespassed on private and federal land, and disrupted critical research, causing harm and risk. You're guilty on multiple counts." She got 10 months in jail, probation, and huge restitution to the USDA for delays, to me for damage, to the HOA for legal costs. Unable to pay, she lost her home and assets. She left Willowbrook in shame, off to serve her time. The community learned hard lessons. Residents demanded HOA reforms, curbing the board's power to act alone. They formed an oversight group to prevent another rogue leader. The farmland hummed again as a quiet USDA lab, pushing sustainable farming with no interference. Wildlife roamed free, the ecology intact, the fields thriving as they had for generations. Drive by Willowbrook today, and you'll see golden fields test plots with sensors and sprinklers. A USDA truck might sit parked, a scientist checking crops or bees. Beyond, Willowbrook's homes stand tidy, gardens blooming. The neighborhood's calmer now, free from a leader who turned bias into chaos. The farmland endures, proof of what happens when private rights and federal work tangle with unchecked ego and how justice can reset the balance, letting fields and suburbs coexist, each minding the lines that keep peace. As for Margaret Hensley, her name lingers in hushed chats when HOAs come up. Remember that electric fence? Folks say, shaking their heads. Her tale warns, the harder you try to fence others out, the tighter the trap you build for yourself.